Hi, I'm Andrea Godfread-Brown, and I'm with Berardi Immigration Law in Buffalo, New York. I am an immigration attorney, and I'm here today to talk about a specialty practice area that has to do with physicians and healthcare. Um, why is this so relevant? Well, I recently attended a conference called the Physician Immigration Law Institute in Washington, D.C., with immigration attorneys from across the United States who are all dedicated to advocacy for friendlier legislation so that all the physicians we so desperately need in this country can live and stay and serve our communities. As recently as 2 months ago, there was a report by the American Medical Association president. And in his address, I thought it was notable that he was highlighting the healthcare crisis and physician shortage in this country, and he had 5 bullet points of ways to address it. His third point was to address the foreign medical graduates that come here to work and get additional training, and to make it easier for them to stay and to work in this country. So part of what I see and I work with my healthcare clients about is that immigration tends to be a hot topic, a political sort of hot button. And really, in the specific area of physician immigration, it's a healthcare issue as much as it's a hot topic in immigration. It helps solve our healthcare crisis and our physician shortage. And here's why. We have had a physician shortage in this country, and we are not graduating enough medical students to fill the need. And we've seen this coming for at least 15 years with the aging baby boomer population. So we've got a high population, that need additional healthcare, less and less physicians available, especially in rural communities outside of those big city hubs. And so we've seen this coming. And believe it or not, a significant amount of physicians that are filling the need in these rural communities are what we call IMGs, International Medical Graduates. So let's talk about what is an IMG. An IMG is somebody an international medical graduate. So they finished their medical training in their home country. I have clients from all over the world. So they finish their medical program, and then they come to the US to do a medical residency program. That could be one situation. The other situation, which I see more and more commonly, is highly skilled, highly trained physicians, surgeons, specialists who have already been practicing medicine in their home countries. They graduated medical school, they did their residency. Oftentimes they're running a whole division of a hospital. Highly skilled, renowned researchers and clinicians who, when they come, if they want to come to the United States and work, must go through the US medical residency program all over again, no matter if they've been practicing medicine for 20 years in their country. So one of the only programs, and the majority of these physicians come on, is the J1 visa program. The J1 visa is not a work visa. It is run through the Department of State, and you have to have a sponsoring organization. And it is intended for people to come and get their training and return to their home country for at least 2 years at the end of that. So you see the problem. Physicians come here, oftentimes moving entire families halfway around the world, finish a 3-year residency program, which they have more often than not already done in their home country, significant time investment, graduate from one of our programs, and then they are subject to this requirement of the J1 visa program that they now return home for 2 years. That is a hardship for many physicians, just logistically, because they've moved their family. Maybe they don't have that many ties to their home country. Maybe their home country is now in turmoil, political or otherwise. Or they just want to stay and serve the communities they're in the United States. That becomes the issue is, why we have to ask ourselves as a country, and this is where it becomes a sort of a political and legislative issue. Why are we going to train these foreign medical graduates that we so sorely need and then tell them they have to go home, or at least they have to leave the US? Sometimes we get those highly skilled physicians who say, great, I'll go elsewhere. And they do go, we lose them. Okay, we need them to stay. We do not have enough US citizens graduating from medical schools to fill our need. And so the only way those physicians, those J1 physicians can stay is if they get a waiver of this 2-year home residency requirement. So their J program has ended, their residency, their fellowship has ended. And they want to stay and work in the community that many of them have already been working in. And there are only a handful of ways available for them to get the waiver. And sometimes they are very complicated with the timing, with the cost, with the unknowns. And then on the heels of that, if they're lucky enough to qualify for and get a waiver, they have to get a work visa to stay. So all of this is temporary. None of this leads to the green card unless an employer sponsors them for one down the road. So one of the reasons I was in DC at this conference was there are 2 pieces of proposed legislation currently in front of Congress that would help to alleviate this physician shortage and these hurdles to get the physicians we need and want to stay here. One of the bills has to do with what's called a Conrad 30 waiver. Every state gets 30 spots for physicians foreign medical graduates who've come and finished a residency program who want to stay, but don't want to be subject to that 2-year home residency requirement. The state public health office has 30 of those waivers available. Each state runs theirs differently. Some states, the demand is very high. Some states, it is not. But they are not guaranteed. They can be difficult to get. And in a lot of states, they're highly competitive, such as Florida and New York and California and states like that. So it's a burdensome process, and it's no guarantee that these physicians will be able to stay long-term with their families or to build their lives here. One of the requirements of almost all the waiver programs available to these physicians, whether it's a Conrad state waiver or another federal agency sponsored, is that they must be working in a medically underserved area or with a medically underserved patient population. So a large number of these trained, physicians who go through their medical education outside the country are placed in rural and low-income areas where the patients desperately need adequate medical care, and the majority of U.S. medical graduates, what everyone would prefer is to make the big money and go to the big name hospital in the big city, and get a much better salary. So the doctors who are IMGs make the decision, find a community, serving these patients who need the services, and make that commitment for 3 years to work in that medically underserved area. So one of the pieces of legislation is to make more of these waivers available, and to streamline the path so that these physicians can get green cards in time, and stay here and practice. So in New York State, where the bulk of my practice occurs, for those 30 Conrad waivers available, that's 30 statewide each year. So you the demand is higher. In the last few years, it's been, 60, 70 plus applications, and it's a competitive process. So, and it's a blind process. You don't know who else is applying or how you're being ranked against the other applicants. So it's a big unknown for doctors who are finishing their residency programs, and they just have to wait and hear if they got a Conrad waiver or not. Otherwise, they're kind of out of options. There's some creative backup options for those physicians who are highly credentialed, other types of visas they can get, but nothing permanent. And that 2-year home residency requirement does not go away until there's only 2 ways to deal with it. You get a waiver or you go home for 2 years. So you're asking yourself, why would we do this to ourselves and leave ourselves in this situation? And that goes back to my first point, which is it's become so politicized. And when we say immigration, everybody thinks, oh, it's all those people coming in across the border, or it's somebody coming in from outside the U.S. to take all the U.S. workers' jobs. And in this situation for physicians and healthcare, that is simply not the case. They are coming in legally and lawfully. They are filling jobs that we don't have the U.S. workers to fill. And we are making it, prohibitively difficult for them to be able to stay. And I think what's really astounding, when I read through the president of the AMA, their statement on the healthcare crisis in this country on the heels of COVID, I'm going to quote some. It said, "This is an insidious crisis going on in medicine today that is having a profound impact on our ability to care for patients, yet it isn't receiving the attention it deserves. This crisis is physician burnout, physician shortages, limiting access to care for millions of people, and it's about to get much worse." So the fact that, one of the 5 main ways of dealing with this immediately that's suggested by the AMA president is that we pass bipartisan legislation to expand residency, training options, greater student loan support, greater and smoother pathways for foreign trained physicians. So that's why the legislation that's in front of Congress is so important, and it is not lumped in with other immigration bills or other parts of immigration law. It really is to address the physician shortage and the healthcare crisis. There are those who would argue that we should just have more graduate medical education available for our U.S. students who want to go. However, that's a long-term solution. That is true, but it's a long-term solution. In other words, those people studying in undergrad right now that need to go to medical school and then residency, you're talking 10 years down the road. And this is a crisis that we have right now. Yes, it is a no-brainer to keep these people here. They're already here. They've already gotten their training. And if the only other option is, if they can't get a waiver, they're going elsewhere. They're going to Thailand and getting high-paying jobs where they need physicians. They're going back to their home country and practicing medicine. We've already invested, in them and their training. They've already invested in coming here and serving the patient population. So it's very much a no-brainer and a seemingly easy fix with these pieces of legislation that would alleviate some of the burden and some of the hurdles for them to be able to stay. So what is the 2-year home residency requirement related to international medical graduate who comes in on a J-1 visa? That 2-year home residency requirement, also referred to as 212E, is part of the legislation in the current J-1 visa program. And because the only 2 options are to get it waived or to go home, there are several waiver programs available to these physicians. And one is the Conrad 30 state Department of Health sponsored waiver. And those can be competitive in certain states. And there's only 30 physicians can get those in each state each year. So that doesn't fill the need. In some of the more medically underserved areas and parts of this country, there are special waiver programs set up, like the Appalachian Regional Commission is a federal commission set up to administer waivers for physicians practicing in very rural communities. But those are geographic, so you're limited geographically by those. There's the Delta Regional Commission. There are also, and those are all, again, some government agencies sponsored these waiver programs. So they're either limited by geography or they're limited by number. Some of them have a lot of restrictions on them. The other types of waivers that physicians could potentially qualify for are hardship or persecution, but those are really limited to very specific, rare situations. So it kind of depends on their circumstances. I can't speak in too much detail on them because I don't handle them, but I know enough to know that a hardship waiver means not hardship to the physician. It means that physician has to show hardship to a U.S. citizen spouse or a U.S. citizen, a U.S. born child. So it's not their hardship, it's hardship for their families. Those are very difficult and can take 2 or more years to go through the system, 2 to 3 years. And you have to document what is the medical urgency, the need for your spouse or your child to stay where you are. The persecution waiver is also very difficult. It is, and that is based on proving that you personally, not you as a race or because of your sexual orientation or anything, but you personally are under threat of persecution by your home country government. So those are difficult to prove and difficult to get, and only apply to limited circumstances. So in most cases, a J1 physician who needs a waiver of that 2-year home residency requirement is looking at a regional commission, a waiver through a state agency, the Department of Health, and that's about it. That's what's available to them. And they cannot get an H-1B visa. They cannot get a green card, even if they were married to a U.S. citizen. So let me give you a case study to put this in perspective. So there's a physician, a client of mine, he's an Indian national. He did his medical residency here. Then he did 2 years of fellowship at a very prestigious institution. And now he works for a hospital that's in a medically underserved area as a critical care physician. He headed up the whole program during COVID to triage and treat those patients that were admitted, because in critical care, he dealt with all the respiratory issues. So Indian National had already been here for 7 years as a J1. During that 7 years, had met and married his U.S. citizen spouse. So he's married to a U.S. citizen, been here 7 years, got his community through the COVID crisis. He would not be able to, even though he's married to a U.S. citizen, he could not get a work visa. He could not get a green card. He could not stay unless he got a waiver. So we had to apply through, because of his specialty practice area, had to apply through the Conrad State 30 program. He was lucky enough to get selected. Then when you get selected, not only do you have to stay with your medically underserved community, but you have to work there for 3 years. So you have to, or you don't get the waiver. So you get one of the waiver spots assigned to you, and you find that out, great. It's not effective unless you work for that employer for 3 years, and then you get to apply for work visa or proceed with, not apply for a work visa, but proceed with the green card process. Even though he was married to a U.S. citizen, and in any other circumstance, he could have applied for a green card based on his marriage to that U.S. citizen. He had to wait until he got the waiver and until he worked for 3 years. So if you add all that together, it's more than 10 years that he's been in this country, more than 4 years that he had been married to a U.S. citizen, had a child. The child was 1 year old before he could even apply for his green card. So that's just one example. My colleagues and I could give you a million, but the average person doesn't know those things, and why should they? But I think that to have an intelligent conversation about the healthcare crisis, the physician shortage, and immigration, you have to understand this a little better without assuming that it's comprehensive immigration reform and we're letting people flood across the borders, which seems to be largely the media and the conversation we hear in national media when immigration is brought up. Neither of these bills in front of Congress are comprehensive immigration solutions at all. They're more healthcare legislation. And by the way, they are completely bipartisan. I mean, a Democratic and Republican senator introduced each of these bills. And the Conrad 30 bill is not even, it's just to extend the program. It's not even asking for major change beyond extending the program and adding some more numbers. So, it continues to get more Democrats and Republicans signing on to it, but it's a long ways from getting people to sign on, and having a bipartisan piece of legislation doesn't mean Congress has to do anything about it, right? Doesn't mean they have to act. So we're hopeful, but it's the best shot we've got in the short term. The only other sort of proposed way to deal with this, which could be done at the same time, is to increase the number of spots in the medical schools. So that would require a lot of financial and infrastructure support for American medical schools to expand their programs so that they could do that. They could even train that many more applicants. But as I said, that's a 10 to 12 year timeline before you see them as physicians actually practicing and offering a clinical practice. So in my role at Senior Counsel at Berardi Immigration Law, I focus my practice on these very issues. On physician immigration is a significant part of my practice. And I've been doing this for more than 20 years. And my clients, while they can be individual physicians, my clients are largely the hospitals, the medical centers, the clinics, even the physician practice groups affiliated with these hospitals, some rural hospitals, community hospitals, which are struggling now, especially after COVID. So this is an issue for them. They are part of the community that is actively advocating to Congress for these immigration laws. They run recruitment in some cases, for years without getting a physician who can fill that role. U.S. citizen or otherwise, they get very few applicants because nobody wants to work in the middle of nowhere for what is not competitive pay for a big city job. So, when they get that applicant, it is most often a physician an IMG who came here for residency and is willing to take this position in a more rural or needy community, so that they can have a path to a green card and will be able to stay. Another example of that is I have a client that is a OBGYN practice group affiliated with a hospital, and they have been searching for almost 3 years now to get an OBGYN to join their practice group, and who specializes, who also can do some of the surgeries that are needed related to those critical cases. And they serve, outside of this hospital, which is in a medium-sized city, they serve communities out and around the hospital that are definitely medically underserved and largely Medicare populations, Medicaid, Medicare. So for 3 years, they've been searching, and they've gotten 2 applicants, one of whom was because it was a family member of somebody there, and that was a U.S. citizen, and the other one is IMG. And so we are going through the process to be able to keep that person here. But yeah, the hospitals and the medical centers and the academic medical institutions are all in this same situation. This is their issue as much as it is, any one person's. It is estimated that more than 83 million people in the U.S. currently live in areas without sufficient access to a primary care physician. Large parts of Idaho and Mississippi. In those states, pregnant women can't find OBGYNs to care for them. 90% of counties in the U.S. are without a pediatric ophthalmologist, 80% without an infectious disease specialist. More than 1/3 of Black Americans live in cardiology deserts. The president of the AMA goes on to say, the physician shortage we have long feared and warned was on the horizon is already here. It's an urgent crisis hitting every corner of this country, urban and rural, with the most direct impact hitting families with high needs and limited means. That's what we're up against. So where do we go from here was sort of the primary purpose of this report. And that's why, he proposed these 5 bullet points, which are Medicare payment reform, reduced administrative burdens, bipartisan legislation to create smoother pathways for foreign trained physicians, ending the criminalization of healthcare, and ensuring that physicians are not punished for taking care of their own mental health needs. There's some interesting other things pointed out in this article saying, consider that 1 in 5 physicians surveyed during the pandemic said that they plan to leave medicine within the next 2 years. 1 in 3 said they were going to cut back on their hours. Nearly half of all practicing physicians in the U.S. today are over the age of 55. So you can see how this has had a cumulative effect. And that is why the American Medical Association, the International Medical Graduate Task Force that I'm a part of, are all working to get to do what we can to get legislation passed to ensure that we can address at least a part of this issue. From where I sit and working with my healthcare hospital clients, medical care groups, this is something that needs to be and can be addressed now through legislation. It can be addressed long-term through, revamping and opening up our own medical education system for our U.S. workers as well. It's estimated that the American Association of Medical Colleges, AAMC, projects a national physician shortfall of at least 37,000 and possibly well over 100,000 over the next decade. So this is an issue we're already up against. And I really think if you talk to most people, they see this in their day-to-day lives. I mean, I do with my family and family members. Just when I'm talking to friends, how long it takes to get an appointment, finding the right physician, having to travel to get to a specialist. These things are already happening. So it's important that we pay attention to the legislation that's there and the abilities that we do have to address it.
Thanks for watching. Here at Berardi Immigration Law, we call ourselves American Dream Facilitators. So be sure to like and subscribe our YouTube channel. You can watch our videos, share them with friends and family, and learn all you need to know about achieving your American dream.